Its sound is the echo of a 3,000-year-old spell. It's the sound of a plant convincing an animal to willingly, repeatedly, poison itself. This isn't a story about a bad habit. This is a story about one of the most successful, most deadly, and most brilliant parasites the world has ever known. It never needed teeth or claws. Its weapon was pleasure. Its disguise was relief. And its target was the human mind. Tonight we wade into the gritty, uncertain, and not so glorious side of human history. Forget the Hollywood versions of cynical detectives and lonely writers. This story begins not in the shadows, but in the sun-drenched, sacred fields of a lost world. The truth is, presented with its power, you, like billions of others, would have called it a gift from the gods. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, but only if you genuinely enjoy deep, investigative storytelling. Now, dim your lights. Let's step into the smoke-filled journey together. Before there was a colony, a carton, or a corporation, there was a leaf, a deceptively simple thing. Nicotina tabacum. It stands a few feet high, its leaves large, velvety, and resilient. They are a lush green soaking up the sun and the warm, fertile soils of a world yet untouched by the Atlantic. They are unassuming, but within them lies a potent secret. A bitter alkaloid, a neurotoxin, evolved to kill insects. A poison that, in a bizarre twist of fate, would one day become one of humanity's most sought-after commodities. The story begins here, in this leaf. It begins in the ember light of a communal fire, in the long, deep history of the Americas. For millennia, the indigenous peoples of this continent cultivated a profound and sacred relationship with the plant. They knew its power. They harvested the leaves, dried them in the sun and over fires, and prepared them with reverence. This was tobacco, raw and spiritual. They didn't just use it, they communed with it. The Maya believed it was a sacred food for the gods. They depicted their deities smoking, blowing smoke into the heavens to communicate with the spiritual realm. The Aztecs associated it with the goddess Cihuacotl, its smoke a symbol of the human soul. In North America, tribes from the Cherokee to the Lakota saw it as a direct line to the Great Spirit. They had many names for it, but its use told you everything you need to know about their relationship with it. It was a conduit to the divine. Shamans used its potent smoke, often inhaled from pipes or enema syringes, to induce trance states, to carry prayers to the heavens, to see the future. It was a seal of peace, smoked in a calumet or peace pipe, to bind treaties between tribes. The smoke was a visible representation of the words spoken, rising to be witnessed by the Creator. It was a medicine, applied to wounds as a poultice, chewed to dull toothaches, or used to treat snake bites and intestinal parasites. But its greatest gift was connection, a social bond, a shared moment of contemplation away from the struggles of a harsh and uncertain world. To share a pipe was to become kin. It was the original social network, not woven with data, but with smoke. The knowledge of the sacred leaf was ancient, a piece of cultural technology passed down from elder to elder, healer to healer. It was a balanced, integrated part of life, powerful but respected, its use governed by ritual and tradition. It was, in its original form, a contained power. But then, the world shifted. In 1492, a new world was found, and with it, this leaf began to travel. It moved with the ships of Columbus. His crewmen, Rodrigo de Gieres and Luis de Torres, were the first Europeans recorded to witness its use in Cuba in 1492. They were baffled by the sight of natives rolling up a leaf, lighting one end, and drinking the smoke from the other. De Gieres tried it himself. He was likely the first European addict. He brought the habit back to Spain, where his neighbors, terrified by the smoke pouring from his mouth and nose, reported him to the Inquisition. He spent 7 years in prison, his habit his only crime. By the time he was released, smoking had spread across the continent. A curious dried bundle was now tucked into the satchels of explorers and conquistadors, traded for iron, for cloth, for knowledge. It made its way across the Atlantic to the courts of Europe. At first, it was a bizarre novelty, a sought weed, a vice of the savage. But a French diplomat in Lisbon, Jean Nicot, from whom the plant would get its scientific name, Nicotiana, became a true believer. He sent snuff, powdered tobacco, inhaled through the nose, to the French court, claiming it had miraculous medicinal properties. Catherine de' Medici used it to treat her debilitating migraines. It was declared a success, an herbe à la reine. It was a sensation. The plant was no longer a sacred herb, it was a European curiosity, a panacea. The trade routes exploded. Spanish and Portuguese sailors, the great merchants of the age, carried tobacco in their galleons. They took it to the Philippines, to Africa, to Japan, and most importantly, they planted it in the soil of their new colonies. Here, in the humid heat of the Caribbean and the American South, tobacco found its true economic calling. It was not just a medicine, it was a currency. In the fledgling, starving colony of Jamestown, Virginia, it was salvation. The colonists were dying of disease and starvation. They tried everything, but the settlement was on the verge of collapse. Then a man named John Rolfe, later famous for marrying Pocahontas, obtained seeds of a sweeter, milder strain of tobacco from Trinidad, Nicotiana tabacum, which was far more palatable to European tastes than the native Nicotiana rustica. He cultivated it, perfected its curing process. In 1614, he shipped the first 4 hogsheads of Virginia tobacco to England. It was an instant hit. This was brown gold. It was the cash crop that saved Jamestown, that built the first great American fortunes. The streets of Jamestown were literally paved with tobacco leaves. It became the currency of the colony. Taxes, fines, and dowries were paid in pounds of tobacco. It was a voracious crop, depleting the soil quickly, which in turn drove the relentless expansion westward, seizing more and more land from Native Americans. And it was a labor-intensive crop. This demand for cheap, brutal labor directly fueled the rise of the transatlantic slave trade. The leaf, once a symbol of peace, was now a driver of one of history's greatest crimes. Its roots soaked in the blood and sweat of African slaves.
For centuries, this was the state of affairs. Tobacco was a constant. For the elite, it was snuff in ornate boxes or cigars after dinner. For the common man, it was a pipe or a chew. It was a social ritual, not yet a personal, frantic compulsion. Its power was undeniable, but its consumption was slow, deliberate. But the world was changing. The age of craftsmanship was giving way to the age of industry, the Gilded Age. In the bustling factories of the late 19th century, a new kind of mind was beginning to ask a new kind of question. It wasn't enough to know that tobacco was pleasurable. They wanted to know how to make it faster, cheaper, and more irresistible. They wanted to industrialize its pleasure, to standardize its delivery, to create a product for the assembly line era. And in a small factory in Durham, North Carolina, a bright, ruthless, and opportunistic young man was about to do just that. He would give that pleasure a new, perfect form. And in doing so, he would change the world forever. The age of the hand-rolled cigar was ending. The age of the cigarette was about to begin. His name was James Buchanan Buck Duke. He was not a scientist, but a businessman, the son of a Washington Duke, who had started a small tobacco company. Buck Duke saw the future, and it was mechanized. In 1881, a man named James Bonsack patented a machine that could produce cigarettes, thin, paper-wrapped tubes of shredded tobacco at an astonishing, almost unimaginable rate. A skilled hand roller could make about 4,000 cigarettes a day. The Bonsack machine could produce 120,000. While other manufacturers were skeptical, fearing the machine would produce more cigarettes than the market could bear, Duke saw its true potential. He gambled everything on it. He leased the Bonsack machine and negotiated a secret deal that gave him a lower royalty rate than his competitors, a classic move to crush them with volume. He understood that the machine didn't just make cigarettes cheaper, it created a massive surplus that demanded a market. His quest was to create one, to manufacture desire on a scale never before seen. The work was audacious, relentless, and brilliant. Using the new tools of mass production and the emerging science of mass marketing, he began a process of systematic cultural assault. He flooded the market with cheap, uniform, machine-rolled cigarettes. He included collectible trading cards in every pack, featuring athletes, actresses, and Native American chiefs, to build brand loyalty from the ground up, especially among the young. He launched massive national advertising campaigns, the first of their kind for a consumer product. His company, the American Tobacco Company, spent millions on billboards, newspaper ads, and magazine spreads. He created a new kind of consumer. He targeted men, but also, daringly, women. In an era of growing female independence, he marketed cigarettes to women as symbols of modernity, liberation, and slimness. Reach for a Lucky instead of a sweet, one famous ad campaign advised. He made smoking fashionable, modern, and accessible. This, he believed, was it. This was the pure essence of tobacco's potential, distilled, packaged, and sold to the masses. The impact on society was revolutionary. For the first time, a powerful, fast-acting dose of nicotine could be delivered in a convenient, portable, disposable, and intensely habit-forming form. A cigarette was a quick, potent hit, a nicotine bolt to the brain that could be administered in a few minutes. It transformed smoking from a leisurely ritual into a personal, psychological need, a crutch for the modern age. It gave a jolt to the factory worker on the line, a moment of glamour to the flapper in the speakeasy, a comfort to the soldier in the trench.
It seemed like a pure, unalloyed triumph of commerce. The American Tobacco Company became a monopoly, a trust that controlled nearly 90% of the market. Buck Duke became one of the richest men in America. But this triumph had a dark twin, a consequence that was slowly, invisibly taking root in the lungs of millions. And a new piece of science was about to reveal it on a scale the world had never seen. In the 1940s and 50s, a new kind of evidence began to emerge, not from advertising agencies, but from hospital wards and research labs. The whispers started with astute doctors, particularly a British physician named Richard Dull and his counterparts in the United States like Everett Graham and Ernst Winder. They noticed a strange and dramatic rise in a once rare disease, lung cancer. Once a medical curiosity, it was now becoming a scourge. Anecdotes became a pattern. Dahl and Austin Bradford Hill in the UK and Winder and Graham in the US began to ask a new, systematic kind of question. They conducted landmark epidemiological studies, comparing the habits of thousands of lung cancer patients with healthy individuals. The results, published in 1950, were undeniable, a seismic shock to the public consciousness. Smokers were dozens of times more likely to develop lung cancer than non-smokers. The link was not just probable, it was causal. The marriage of the mass-produced cigarette and the modern human respiratory system was a catastrophic turning point in history. The industrialized cigarette, with its inhaled smoke, created a method of delivering nicotine that was fast, efficient, and devastatingly destructive. The tar, a sticky brown residue, coated the delicate lining of the lungs,
carrying with it carcinogens like benzopyrene and radioactive polonium-210 from the fertilizer used on tobacco fields. And this plague arrived just in time for a war that would entrench the habit deeper than ever before. World War II was a conflict of unprecedented industrial scale and psychological trauma. And the American government, recognizing its role in morale, classified tobacco as an essential wartime commodity, right alongside food and ammunition. Cigarettes were included in soldiers' standard C rations. They were a comfort in the freezing trenches, a currency to trade with locals, a tiny, burning piece of home. General Pershing famously said, "You ask me what we need to win this war, I answer tobacco as much as bullets." The armies marched with them. When the war ended in 1945 and the soldiers returned home as heroes, they brought a new, deeply ingrained habit with them. They were hailed as the greatest generation, and the habit they popularized was seen as part of their rugged, victorious identity. They had left the battlefield, but they could not and would not leave behind the pack and the lighter. The condition became so common, it was given a name by its critics: the cigarette plague. It was the first modern epidemic of lifestyle-caused disease, a pandemic spread not by a virus, but by advertising and addiction. These men, once celebrated as heroes, were now unknowingly the vectors of a slow-moving disaster. They were the first generation to live and die by the terrible paradox of Buck Duke's creation. The provider of comfort could create a suffering all its own, a prison with walls made of smoke and a sentence of debilitating disease.
Commerce had solved one problem: the slow, inefficient nature of traditional tobacco, only to create a new and more terrifying one: mass death. The search was now on for a solution, or at least the appearance of one. The world needed a cigarette with all the pleasure, but without its dreadful curse of disease. The world needed a safer alternative. And in the gleaming, state-of-the-art laboratories and boardrooms of the world's most powerful tobacco companies, a team of scientists and executives believed they were on the verge of creating it, or, more accurately, marketing it. They were looking for an escape from culpability. The setting for our next scene is not a colonial plantation, but a place of gleaming modernity and corporate ambition. It is the mahogany-paneled boardrooms of the tobacco industry in the mid-20th century. And the protagonist is not a single man, but a corporation. The tobacco industry, now fractured after the breakup of Duke's monopoly, but still immensely powerful. They were titans of industry, a commercial powerhouse that had built its fortune on a simple leaf. Their success was built on rigorous marketing, a deep faith in advertising, and a keen, unshakable sense of denial. Having conquered the world of consumers, they now faced their most formidable challenge yet: the cold, hard light of science. In 1964, the U.S. Surgeon General, Luther Terry, released a landmark report. It was a thunderclap that echoed around the globe. It officially declared that smoking caused lung cancer and chronic bronchitis. It was a public relations disaster of epic proportions. The industry panicked, but their response was not to fix the problem. It was to manage the truth, to sow doubt, to create confusion. The challenge the executives set for their teams was not to create a genuinely safe cigarette, but to create the perception of one. They wanted a new product, a product with the satisfying feel and nicotine hit of a cigarette, but without the public stigma. And most importantly, they wanted a product that could be marketed as a solution, a healthier choice. They believed it was possible, through marketing and slight modification, to separate the good effects of nicotine from the bad. They wanted to create a safe smoke, or at least the convincing illusion of one. The task of manufacturing this new wonder product fell to their marketing departments and compliance scientists. Their method was twofold: filtration and light cigarettes. They added filters not to make the smoke safer in any meaningful way, but to give the consumer a psychological crutch, a tangible symbol of
protection. The early filters were largely cosmetic. They developed low-tar and light cigarettes using porous paper and ventilation holes in the filter that would dilute the smoke with air when tested by machines. But this was a tragic, deliberate deception. The industry's own internal research, which would later be exposed in court, revealed a devastating truth. When smokers switched to light cigarettes, their bodies craved the same nicotine dose. They would unconsciously compensate by smoking more cigarettes, taking more puffs, inhaling more deeply, or, most tellingly, blocking the filter's ventilation holes with their fingers or lips to get the full experience they craved. The machines were fooled. The smokers were not. They were often inhaling just as much tar and nicotine, but now with a false sense of security.
The industry knew this. Internal memos from the 1970s and 80s discussed the habits of smokers and how to design cigarettes that would deliver the necessary impact and satisfaction despite the filters. They had found the holy grail of corporate deceit, a way to reassure the public, to stave off regulation, and to keep their customers without fundamentally changing their deadly product. It was the perfect, cynical strategy. The tobacco companies immediately launched a massive, reassuring marketing campaign. They sent free samples of new filtered and light brands to millions of households. They published advertisements in magazines and on television featuring doctors in white coats smilingly endorsing certain brands as less irritating or just what the doctor ordered. One famous campaign for a brand even used the slogan, 20,000 physicians say, brand is less irritating. They positioned it as a responsible choice, a testament to the power of corporate innovation and concern. The deception, born of a mixture of willful ignorance, flawed research, and cold commercial ambition, was complete. The world, desperate for a way to keep its habit without facing its consequences, was ready to believe. And so the trap was reset. The industry immediately launched a massive, reassuring marketing campaign. They sent free samples of new filtered and light brands to millions of households. They published advertisements in magazines and on television featuring doctors in white coats smilingly endorsing certain brands as less irritating or just what the doctor ordered. One famous campaign for a brand even used the slogan, 20,000 physicians say brand is less irritating. They positioned it as a responsible choice, a testament to the power of corporate innovation and concern. The deception, born of a mixture of willful ignorance, flawed research, and cold commercial ambition, was complete. The world, desperate for a way to keep its habit without facing its consequences, was ready to believe. And so the trap was reset. The industry began producing filtered and light cigarettes by the billions, shipping its colorful, reassuring packs to every corner of the globe, aware but utterly unwilling to see that they were not curing an epidemic, but perpetuating it, giving it a new, more insidious form. The first threads of this great deception began to unravel not in grand pronouncements from governments, but in the quiet, dogged work of journalists, whistleblowers, and public health advocates. They began as whispers, as leaked internal documents smuggled out of the tobacco companies themselves. A landmark report in the 1970s revealed that the industry had been conducting its own secret research for decades. Research that confirmed the addictive nature of nicotine and the carcinogens in smoke, long before the public knew. A memo from a Brown and Williamson executive in 1963 laid it bare. Nicotine is addictive. We are then in the business of selling nicotine, an addictive drug. This was their private truth. Publicly, they maintained a united front of denial. More troublingly,
When confronted with these reports, the industry confidently assured the public that the evidence was merely statistical and not proven, that the science was still out. "We are not in the business of selling drugs," they insisted to Congress. "We are selling pleasure." Their research, they claimed, was inconclusive. And for a while, the world was confused, the waters muddied. The habit was simply too entrenched, the relief it provided too immediate, and the denial too comforting for many to abandon it based on a distant, contested threat. But the threads kept unraveling, and soon the whispers grew into a roar of litigation and public outrage. The central catastrophic flaw in the industry's miracle was a simple, brutal matter of chemistry and biology. Nicotine was not just a habit. It was one of the most addictive substances known, rewiring the brain's reward pathways, creating a powerful physical and psychological dependence. And cigarette smoke was not just smoke. It was a complex cocktail of over 7,000 chemicals, at least 70 of which were known carcinogens. No filter, no ventilation hole could change that fundamental poisonous reality.
The concept of light was given a more detailed and terrifying vocabulary in courtrooms. It was a fraud, a deliberate lie. Public health doctors chronicled the symptoms with grim certainty, their list growing: lung cancer, emphysema, heart disease, strokes, bladder cancer, pancreatic cancer, cataracts. It was a complete systemic assault. The industry's free samples and reassuring advertising had acted as a vast, uncontrolled, and deadly experiment on the public, and the results were pouring into hospitals and morgues. Wards were filled with a new class of patient, the lifelong smoker, now gasping for air, connected to oxygen tanks. These were not just statistics. They were teachers, clerks, housewives, and laborers, ordinary people who had been seduced by advertising, hooked by chemistry, and had walked into a trap from which the only escape was often death. The very companies that had championed the product were now faced with the monumental task of defending it in court against a wave of lawsuits from states and dying individuals. The medicine cabinet, once a source of comfort and relief, had for millions become a death sentence. By the 1990s, governments began to turn their back on the fallen industry. The shift from glamour to menace was complete. It was a slow, cultural curdling. As respectable doctors grew openly hostile, a profound change occurred in how smoking was viewed. The habit, having lost its social legitimacy, did not simply disappear. Instead, it began a downward migration, pushed out of restaurants, off airplanes, and out of offices by a wave of clean indoor air laws. The user base began to transform. The glamorous movie star was replaced by a new archetype, the addicted, often lower-income individual, smoking alone outside in the cold, a social pariah. These were people for whom the drug's potent relief from stress, boredom, and the struggles of poverty was its primary, desperate appeal. The method of consumption, however, remained the same. The elegant cigarette holder was gone. The new users bought their packs at the gas station, their habit now a marker of socioeconomic status. This transformation coincided with a new wave of social regulation and a powerful moral panic about secondhand smoke, which created the perfect political climate for government action. For decades, the industry had fought off regulation with powerful lobbies and political donations. But now, a powerful movement for public health was gaining unstoppable momentum, driven by a coalition of activists, doctors, and aggrieved families who had lost loved ones. The result was the Master Settlement Agreement of 1998. The four largest tobacco companies agreed to pay the states hundreds of billions of dollars over 25 years to cover public health care costs and, crucially, to restrict their advertising,
especially marketing targeted at youth. They were forced to dismantle the Joe Camel campaign and billboard advertising. On its surface, it was a monumental victory for public health, but the problem was wrenched from the hands of pure commerce and thrown into the arms of a complex, ongoing legal and public health battle. With advertising restricted in the West, the industry simply pivoted. They focused their marketing firepower overseas, in developing nations across Asia and Africa, with fewer regulations and a burgeoning youth population. They introduced slim and menthol cigarettes to target women and younger demographics. The problem of tobacco had not been solved. It had been globalized, exported. The little pack that had once been a symbol of American cool was now gone from American television. In its place stood the graphic warning label, the public service announcement, and the smoker huddled outside a building. The comforting leaf, having deceived the Western world, was now officially a menace at home, but a growth industry abroad.
The law, in its infinite and often slow-moving wisdom, had slammed the door shut on the old ways. The settlements, the advertising bans, the sin taxes, they had declared the age of unchecked tobacco promotion over. But in the grand, drafty house of global commerce and human addiction, another door, a sleek, high-tech door, had just creaked open. A new vacuum was created, a market of addicted smokers looking for a way out, and a new generation looking for a new kind of buzz. Nature, especially the nature of addiction, abhors a vacuum, and the vacuum left by the decline and stigmatization of the traditional cigarette was vast and deep and begging to be filled. Into this void stepped a new kind of company, one that understood technology, design, and addiction better than any tobacco farmer. They wore hoodies and lab coats instead of suits, and they measured profit not in acres of land, but in devices sold and flavored liquid refills. The modern nicotine trade, the one that would define the early 21st century, was not born in a Virginia field. It was born in the tech hubs and pharmaceutical labs of China. In 2003, a Chinese pharmacist named Han Lick, a heavy smoker himself, patented the first commercially successful electronic cigarette. He was motivated by the death of his father, also a smoker, from lung cancer. His invention was simple in concept, a battery-powered device that heated a liquid solution containing nicotine into an inhalable vapor. No tobacco, no combustion, no smoke, just nicotine. It was, in theory, harm reduction. It was marketed as a miracle, a way to get the nicotine without the thousands of carcinogens found in cigarette smoke. It was smoking without the smoke. It was the perfect product for a health-conscious but still addicted world. The first e-cigarettes were clunky, cigalikes, and niche, but the technology evolved at a blistering pace. The companies that rose to dominate the market, like Juul, were not tobacco companies at first. They were tech startups, founded by Stanford graduates. They saw the potential immediately. This was a cleaner, more discreet, more efficient, and more socially acceptable delivery system for the same ancient, addictive alkaloid. So they built the devices, not in massive, sooty factories, but in sophisticated, clean manufacturing plants in China. They employed chemists and flavorists, the true wizards of this new trade. They took pure nicotine, often derived from tobacco, and mixed it with propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, and a vast, alluring array of flavorings. From fruity pebbles to cool mint, from mango to creme brulee. They were artists of a new, potent science. They created pods that were incredibly easy to use, sleek, and packed with a potent hit of nicotine salt, a formulation that made the vapor less harsh and allowed for much higher concentrations of the drug to be absorbed quickly into the bloodstream. The marketing was a masterpiece of digital age persuasion. It was aggressive, it was comprehensive, and it was breathtakingly successful. They launched campaigns on social media, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, platforms teeming with young users. Their ads featured bright colors, trendy, youthful models,
and a message of liberation, social belonging, and sleek modernity. They presented it not as a drug delivery device, but as a lifestyle accessory, a tool of the modern, savvy individual.
Most astonishingly, and with an irony so profound it echoed the light cigarette deception of the past, they marketed the e-cigarette as a cure for addiction itself. It was promoted aggressively as a smoking cessation device, a way to wean oneself off deadly cigarettes. Smokers desperate for a solution to their addiction embraced this claim with desperate relief. Here at last was the high-tech exit ramp. And so, the vaporizer entered the public sphere not through the back alleys, but through the front door of the convenience store and the trendy, minimalist vape shop. It was sold in a rainbow of flavors that held zero appeal for a 50-year-old smoker, but immense appeal to a 15-year-old. A teenager could walk into a mall or order online a device that looked like a USB drive with a flavor profile of mango or gummy bear. It was just another tech gadget, another accessory for the modern life, another cool thing to do. For a few short, heady years, it seemed that technology had truly delivered a cure for the world's smoking habit, a balm for its addiction. The sleek little device was everywhere, a quiet, ubiquitous presence promising pleasure without the penalty, a clean vice for a new generation. The world, it seemed, had found its new hero. But the first threads of this new high-tech deception were already beginning to unravel. The unraveling began not in medical journals, but in high school bathrooms and principals' offices. It began as whispers, as scattered, frantic anecdotes from the front lines of education. A teacher in Colorado wrote an email to a parent in 2018, noting with alarm that several of her students seemed to be using their jewels in class, their focus shattered, their hands constantly fidgeting. More troublingly, they seemed agitated, unable to make it through a 50-minute period without a nick fit. School administrators reported an epidemic of vaping, a problem that was odorless, discreet, and rampant. The central catastrophic flaw in this new miracle was the same old problem, supercharged: nicotine. The high-potency nicotine salts delivered a powerful, fast-acting dose to the brain, creating a cycle of reinforcement that was even more potent and intensely addictive for the developing plastic brains of adolescents. A single Juul pod could contain as much nicotine as an entire pack of 20 cigarettes. The brain, once rewired by nicotine in its teen years, would crave it for a lifetime, priming it for a return to cigarettes or a permanent, expensive vaping habit. The concept of a gateway was turned on its head. For public health officials, this wasn't primarily a gateway out of smoking. For a generation that had never smoked, it was a gateway into a lifelong nicotine addiction. The free samples that had been so generously distributed at concerts and events, the social media influencers, the colorful flavors, it had all acted as a vast, uncontrolled, and devastatingly effective clinical trial on youth, and the results were pouring in. A new generation was being hooked, sanctioned by the very technology that promised salvation. The quiet little device from the tech lab had completed the plant's long, strange, adaptive journey. It had traveled from the sacred pipe of the shaman, through the colonial plantation drenched in injustice, into the factories of the Gilded Age, across the airwaves of Madison Avenue, through the courtrooms of the late 20th century, and finally landed here, in the hands of a new, unsuspecting generation, disguised as a tech marvel. It was no longer just a sacred herb or an economic engine. It had become the lifeblood of a new, subterranean pediatric addiction, a source of immense new corporate wealth, and the latest front in a centuries-old public health crisis. The miracle leaf had always been a liar, but its final, high-tech evolution was perhaps its most insidious and effective trick of all. A trick that left behind a legacy of renewed addiction, so profound that the world is still struggling to regulate it, let alone begin the work of breaking its spell on the young.
The weight of this history is measured not in tons of leaf or in billions of dollars of profit, but in dependencies. The shortness of breath walking up a flight of stairs, the nagging cough that won't go away, the panic of a lost vape pen. The legacy of tobacco, in all its forms, is a story of control, of lives managed by a chemical and futures tethered to a habit. The fight against it is no longer a simple war to be won, but a complex, eternal public health challenge to be managed. It is being fought not just by regulators and teachers, but by scientists in labs, by parents checking backpacks, by public health workers in the developing world, and by individuals who every single day make the quiet, courageous choice to fight for their own freedom from an ancient, adaptable foe. There is no final victory in this story, no easy end to the long addiction. There is only the slow, difficult, unglamorous work of education, of enforcing regulations, of developing new cessation tools, of saving one life, one child, one smoker at a time, of trying to clear a little air from the immense, persistent haze cast by the leaf, the factory, and now the microchip. The gift from the gods that deceived the world has taught us a hard, enduring lesson, that some gifts are curses in disguise, that pleasure can be a prison, and the quiet, ongoing, unyielding work of breaking free is perhaps the only true freedom we have.